Bobby Fischer once won a staggering 20 games of chess in a row during the late stages of the 1970 World Championships. The only longer winning streak at this high level was a 25-game win streak achieved by Wilhelm Steinitz between 1873 and 1882, although one could argue that there was a different level of competition between those two eras. However, those two records pale in comparison to the absolute GOAT of chess, Death. Since the dawn of time, Death has never lost a match. Ever. The fact of Death is the subject of Ingmar Bergman's 1957 Swedish film, The Seventh Seal. The title refers to an apocalyptic passage in the Book of Revelation, which bookmarks the beginning and end of the film. It's quite fitting, as this film takes place following the return from a crusade, only to be met with a deadly plague that is ravaging the land. A very apocalyptic setting indeed. The film begins by the sea, where we meet a knight and his squire returning from a decade of war in the Holy Land. Death shows up and announces to the knight that he has come to take him, but the knight convinces Death to give him a reprieve so long as he can resist him in a game of chess, in one of the most iconic movie scenes of all time. Death agrees for amusement's sake, knowing full well that he'll win eventually. The knight, Antonius Bloch, played by the legendary Max von Sydow, is a pious man. However, the horrors of war that he had witnessed has left him with too many unanswered questions, and God has been silent. So his purpose in the game is not to extend his life, but to find answers. Answers to his questions about the meaning of life and the afterlife. Thus begins his quest for knowledge. Along the way, we are introduced to an ensemble of other characters, all of whom bring different perspectives and experiences to complement Bloch's quest. There is his squire, a rough around the edges but good-hearted atheistic foil to Bloch's piety. There's a family of actors, father, wife, and son, which sort of symbolizes an earthly holy family. There's a cucked blacksmith, his promiscuous wife, and her lover. There's an accused witch who is to be burned at the stake. And finally, there's the mostly silent female companion who tags along after the squire saves her from being defiled by another man. All of these characters and more throughout the film must decide how they will act when they encounter the inevitable and ever-present death. What makes this movie so timeless and relatable is how it is a contemplative piece on some of humanity's biggest philosophical conundrums. The knight, in particular, is a very relatable character. He is the archetype of all those who question their faith or lack thereof. He's a man of faith but lacks belief. Like anyone who takes matters of faith seriously, he has doubts and questions. And true to real life, the film offers no definitive answers about what lies beyond. Death himself is unknowing. He is only there to do his job collecting souls. Where the souls go afterwards is of no concern to him. Because death comes for us all in the end, it is no wonder that this film resonates so well with so many people of all types of beliefs. We all have our own unanswered questions, and this film can help us contemplate them in a way. Personally, I've always been more curious about what happens to a person right before they die, rather than what happens after. What is a person's last moment of consciousness like? If you could strap on some kind of recording device to their brain, what would be the last thing we see right before the tape runs out? For those whom death comes suddenly and unexpectedly, their final thoughts must be strangely ordinary. It could be anything that you think of randomly at any given moment. Then there are people who know that they're dying. and their last thoughts might be just as varied depending on their convictions. I don't know, it's just kind of strange to think about creating a memory that you'll never get the opportunity to reflect on. For a film that's only an hour and a half long, The Seventh Seal is dense with symbolism. Obviously, the chess match represents the battle for the knight's life, but even the pieces on the board have meaning. When Antonius Block reveals that his strategy is to attack with his knight and bishop, this isn't supposed to reflect an actual chess strategy one might use, but rather it symbolizes how he is approaching his own spiritual battle. The knight, of course, represents himself, and the bishop represents God. So it is with God that he battles death. Then later, when death takes Antonius' queen, he is actually foreshadowing that he will come for Antonius' real queen, his wife. This is just one example of the symbolism packed throughout the film. As I said before, there's also the family of actors that mirrors the Holy Family in some ways. The motif of God's silence throughout the film likely is meant to represent how director Ingmar Bergman's own Lutheran father treated him during his religious upbringing. The film also begins by the sea, a place of change and dynamism. The characters travel inland, which is a much more solid and static place, only to end up by the sea again at the end of the film. There's a lot that could be unpacked in all of these points, but this review is already becoming kind of long for my standards, plus all of it's open for interpretation anyway, so I digress. Now, one final thing I'd like to touch on briefly is the music. I don't think I've seen any other review actually mention this part of the film, but I think what The Seventh Seal does with its music is quite brilliant. The Seventh Seal has a very minimalist score. In fact, there's no music at all for most of it. Other than when the characters are making music for themselves, the only time we ever hear a score is when death arrives on a scene and an ominous tune plays. Since it's the only music we hear, it really stands out and helps make death's presence feel very palpable. This is an excellent way that the film achieves its purpose in reminding us that death is very real and will win his game of chess with us all eventually. I would say that despite not always showing the church in the kindest of light, The Seventh Seal is actually one of the greatest religious films ever made. It deals with matters of life, death, faith, and belief in a very mature and thoughtful manner. More so than what most mainstream religious films just don't seem to be able or willing to do. And for that, I appreciate it. It's not a film that one watches to feel good or simply be entertained, but it is a film, at least for me, that can provide some comfort in certain dark times. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. If you made it this far, and you thought this was a good video, I'd encourage you to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. There's also a link for my Twitter in the description for those interested, and until next time, good night.